Welcome everyone. This presentation is being recorded. We'll also share the slides along with the link to the video in our Mustang Bulletin tomorrow, this Friday. All right, thanks Alex. Let's go to the next slide. This is a Mustang Connections, as I mentioned. This is our opportunity in the middle school to share with you what's going on in our middle school right now. We also have the 2030 series and the No Value Care series. We appreciate you coming along to these sessions and learning more about what we're doing here at school. On the next slide, you'll see some photos of our grade 7 students. If Alex and I look a little weary, it's because we've just gotten back from the grade 7 trip to Hiroshima. We had a wonderful time with our 7th graders. What a fantastic group of kids. You'll see here some pictures of our students presenting their origami cranes at the monument to Sadako Sasaki, there. If you're not familiar with Sadako's story, she was a young woman impacted by the atomic bombing in Hiroshima. She later succumbed to the impact of the radiation. But she was a great ambassador for peace as a school student herself, and folded 1,000 origami cranes to promote the message of peace. Her story is linked in the slides, and you'll see that in the Mustang Bulletin. So our students continue the tradition. They folded 1,000 origami cranes to take down and present to the monument, and they were hung there for others to see. A very moving ceremony. You'll also see pictures of our hikers. This was the toughest hiking group. They hiked to the top of Mount Misen. Some students went up the ropeway and just did half the hike, but this group did the lot. And there they are in a beautiful weather, and you can see all the little islands behind them in the inland sea there off Hiroshima. A beautiful day's hiking. We had a wonderful time. So we'll see the panel on the next slide. I'm Pip Curtis. I'm the middle school principal here, and I'm joined by Jeline Murray. There's Jeline, and by Alex, our counsellor, and you'll hear from both of them in just a minute. Unfortunately, Mr. Vermeer and Ms. Vrend can't be with us today. We do have some type A flu going around. You may be aware. So thank you for keeping your children home if they're not well. We do have more students and faculty wearing their masks at the moment, and being careful to sanitize as there are a few bugs going around. All right. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about social and emotional learning and well-being, particularly about the Panorama survey we use here in the middle school to learn more about how our students are feeling. We'll look at the data today with Jeline, and then hear from Alex how we use that data with our students and teachers to improve our program every year.
Thank you, Pip. Okay, so I wanted to start off, again, my name is Jeline Murray, and I am the K-12 Learning Data and Assessment Specialist here at ASIJ. And as I was preparing for this presentation, I came across this great quote that I wanted to share with you. Intertwining social and emotional learning and academics advances the ability of our students to adapt to change with the essential skills to effectively manage new challenges. And I thought this was a really great quote coming from Dr. Karen Burke out of Scholastic, because it speaks to a lot of the work that we're doing across the school with deep learning and the focus on portrait of a learner competencies. So I just wanted to use that to ground us a bit today. Go ahead. And bring your attention to this slide. So this slide comes directly from New Pedagogies for Deep Learning, and it really helps us to focus in on the connection between deep learning, well-being, and equity. And so creating psychological safety, having space for student voice and agency, having high expectations that lead to high efficacy. But I also wanted to zoom in on the acknowledge that emotion is the gatekeeper to cognition. And this is one of the reasons that we collect this data. We do want to know about students' social emotional learning and well-being, and teaching them to think about they're thinking, not only recognizing how they're feeling, but recognizing why they are feeling that way and what impact those feelings and emotions might have on the academics and the learning, and they're all interconnected. Okay, so this is a slide. Before we administer the SEL Wellbeing Survey, we have a slide deck that we use with students to prepare, and we give the survey in spring, in fall, sorry, and in spring. And we just let them know that the purpose is we collect this data because we want to better understand them. We want to better understand how they're feeling and thinking about not only their goals and challenges, but also their learning and relationships and the positive and challenging feelings that they might be feeling at the time. We also let them know that it doesn't impact their grades in any way, and we really want them to respond honestly, and we hope that they do. And we showed them how it's connected to the mindset portrait of a learner competency and the dimension of grit, resilience, and adaptability, since many of the questions in the Panorama survey focus on grit, and it's something that we've been focusing for a while across the school. So here's an example of some of the questions the students were asked to reflect on, thinking about their learning strategies and how they are able to try different strategies, and how often are they able to choose the effective strategy that works to them. So before we even administered the survey, we gave them examples so they knew what to expect and knew what they were going to have to answer and think about. So that's example of the learning strategies questions. Go on to the next one. As a school, because of our work with deep learning and our work around student agency and choice and voice, we wanted to have a custom question. So this particular question isn't a Panorama question, but it is one that we do want to track over time. So we ask students how much they feel empowered to explore their own interest in school, and we'll continue to keep track of that. And you'll hear a little bit more about this later, but this is an example of a student report. The students will receive their personal reports during advisory class and have a chance to talk about how they've grown in different areas. Because this survey is a bit slightly different than some of the ones we've done in the past, we've narrowed it down a little bit to focus on grit learning strategies, positive relationships, or supportive relationships, and positive and challenging feelings. But Panorama does keep their data from previous surveys. So if they've been here for a while, they still have access to that data. And during their advisory classes, they can talk about where they've grown, what changes that they've seen in themselves over time. But Alex will talk about that a little bit more later. And then now we're going to just dig into what is it that our students are telling us about themselves and how they're feeling and learning in their relationships. Just to give you a little bit of background, if you aren't familiar with Panorama, Panorama Education is a US-based company that has different survey packages to help schools measure social and emotional well-being. Sometimes they're focused on school climate or sense of belonging. It might be services. So they have a range of surveys that are available to schools, and we use several of them in different capacities. The reason that we use them is because they are reliable and valid, and the questions are normed across US schools. However, there are quite a few international schools who use them as well. So when we think about the data that is collected as it's compared to national norms, that also includes US schools as well as international schools that use them. So here is an overview of our student data, and you can see that we have a lot to be proud of and a lot to celebrate. We've grown a lot in favorable responses since the fall, and typically, I'll explain a little bit more later, but typically a favorable response by Panorama is considered a choice in one of those top two categories. So it might be always, frequently, somewhat frequently, and so on and so forth. So anytime there is a top 2 response, they consider that a favorable response. So the first thing that we want to highlight is grit. So you'll notice that there was a 4% increase in the favorable responses for grit. And I think that speaks a lot to the work that is being done in the middle school and in advisory and in the counseling programs around getting kids to think about their challenges, how they respond to setbacks, how often they're able to set goals and move through their goals, and really to celebrate the challenges. Is an area that we've been working on as a school for a really long time, and we are excited to see the growth. On the next slide, you'll see some of the questions that the students were asked to respond to, and you'll notice that there is a 7% increase in the question of, if you have a problem while working towards an important goal, how well can you keep working? And an increase in how often do you stay focused on the same goal for several months at a time. And I think a lot of conversations around goal setting and challenges have been taking place. And so students are more aware of their own goals and how they are working towards those. Right, next is supportive relationships. And you'll see that there is a 3% increase in amount of favorable responsive and supportive relationships. The next slide. On this slide, you can see which questions the students were asked about, and shout out to parents and families. You'll notice that that question has a 92% favorable response, and it's up by 3% from the fall. So great that students feel that they are being supported at home and at school. You'll notice that there was a 10% increase in students feeling like they had a teacher or adult from school that they can be completely themselves around. That speaks to all of the work on well-being, the counseling programs, the advisory programs, our work, equity work. And so we continue to grow in that area. The learning strategies is another one where we saw a really positive increase, and you can go to the next slide to see some of the questions. So because of all of the work that we're doing and the constant reflections around portrait of a learner competencies and really focusing on how students learn and trying different strategies, students are hearing that language, and they're also starting to be more aware of what works for them and being exposed to different strategies that they can use in their toolkit in order to advance their own learning. So you'll notice that when you get stuck while learning something new, how likely are you to try a different strategy is up by 8% in the fall. So we're very proud of that. And positive feelings, we grew 1% in this area. Well, I'll talk a little bit on the next slide about the types of questions that were asked. So you'll notice that, and just to put this in context, the students took this survey the week before spring break. So you'll notice that we were up by 4% in how often do you feel happy? And there was also an increase in how well or how often students feel loved. You also may be going to the one that's in the red where they're has the lowest score, which is how often do you feel safe? So I want to put that in context for you as well. With this particular question, the answer choices were, the top one was always, almost always, and then the next answer choice was frequently. So 41% of students said frequently. However, in this particular case, Panorama codes almost always as the only favorable response. So I just wanted to put that into context. Also, again, students took this survey a week before spring break. In some advisory classes, they've been in their safeguarding unit. So there may have been some feelings that have come up for kids. We really want to dig into how students define safety, and if they mean at school or at home. It could have been that kids were traveling around. So having those discussions with the advisors helps us to get a little bit more context to why students might be feeling the way that they did, or how they define some of these emotions within that moment to help us better understand that meeting.
And Jolene, I think this was around the time that we went mask optional, and I know we've had lots of conversations with kids who were feeling a bit anxious about removing their masks, either because of their self-concept, showing their face to others for the first time in a long time, or because of lingering concerns around the pandemic. So those are some of the things that we're wondering about as we look at the responses to that question.
All right, so I'm almost finished. They had access to open response questions, and one of them was regarding what makes them feel the happiest right now. So you'll see that family is right in the middle and bolded. And so when looking through most of the open responses, family was the one thing that, family and friends, spending time, some of the things that rose to the top of what's important and what makes our students happy. And in the last slide for me, you'll notice that what feels the hardest for you right now, schoolwork is there, sometimes friendships. So schoolwork, friends, homework are things that are on the student's mind, and advisory classes and the counseling program allow students to have conversations and discussions about their feelings around some of these things. And it's good for students to share with us and be honest, and also for teachers to receive and see that feedback as well, so that we can have conversations with students and see what might the underlying thing on their mind be and help them work through it. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Alex, who will pick up from here. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just interject. Sorry, Alex, just about to get started. I forgot to remind people, please at any stage, feel free to pop your questions in the chat or in the Q&A feature. We can either come to those questions at the end of our presentation, or I can type some responses as we go along. Thanks, Alex.
Hi, everyone. You'll notice the next few slides, there's going to be different styles in our slide deck. So I'll be showing you what we actually do in advisory with students around student well-being, the well-being data. And so the first slide deck is students reflect on the community as a whole, what the community has said about the data, and they get an opportunity just to kind of reflect and to look at that. And so I'll talk about students individually looking at the data, and then also our time as faculty as we look at the data and we talk about how might this inform our decision making around advisory and supporting students as well. So we show this to students, and the question they always ask is, why are we doing this? Why do we need to know about this? And so we just let them know it's a time that they can express themselves. It's a time that they can create a more safe and inclusive environment. It's a time to learn about our community as a whole, to think outside ourselves, because we're individuals, but we're also a community at ASIJ. And so what is the community dealing with? What is the community, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses? And what do we want to celebrate, and what do we want to work on as a community? And so what we'll do is the advisory teacher will show them the data that Jolene talked about. And so this is the overall data. So the advisory teacher will just explain that a little bit more about this. And they'll get an opportunity. Students will be able to reflect on what they're seeing with this and ask questions. And then they're asked to get into small groups, and they discuss whether they know this about the data, what can we celebrate as well. And then, sorry, just going through my notes, and then what surprised them about the data as well. So they'll get in the small groups, they'll think, they'll share, they'll talk to each other about it. And then the next part is where they'll get into small groups again, and it's more about their observations and insights to each of the questions. So each of the questions, as Jolene talked about, is the supportive relationships, the learning strategies, positive feelings, grit, and challenging feelings. So the teacher will have these different questions based on those topics, and students will go around and they'll talk about each one. And so, like, for example, this one on the screen is the questions regarding to grit. So students will think about what motivates you to continue to work towards your goals, who and what helps you to be accountable, and how do you know you're making progress. So they'll talk to one another and they'll gain ideas from each other. They'll hear what another person is saying about what helps them and supports them. So not only are they learning about the community, but they're learning about each other in their advisory group and having a chance as a group to reflect on some of these questions. Oops. And then the next part in advisory is they'll do a gallery walk. And so in the gallery walk, the teacher will have all these questions. They'll have about 5 or 6 questions and they'll place them around the room, and students will have sticky notes. And so they'll go each question and they'll answer the question. So, like, for example, this one on the screen, it's what's going well for you to feel a sense of belonging and have a voice and agency in your experience at ASIJ. So each student will have a sticky note. They'll answer the question, place it on the poster, and then go to the next one. And then after they do that, they'll go around again. And they'll just make comments on what other people are saying, like, oh, what do you agree with? What kind of surprised you? What questions do you have? And so again, it's an opportunity for them to engage with one another. And it's an opportunity for the advisor to see what are students saying and to really hear their voices, and give students an opportunity, again, to see from one another what other people are saying and to learn from each other as well. Then after they do the community reflection on the data, then they'll go into just personal goal setting. So what happens is, as each student answers questions, they get a personal sheet that shows kind of their own answers. So the advisory teacher will hand it to them, and then they'll have a time in advisory class to be led through a group of questions where they can really reflect on the data that they said about themselves. So they're given this report, and the report, as Jolene said, like, this is the way that they answered. And the great thing is that it shows it over time. So it shows even their past answers in terms of how they've grown and where they're at. So each year they'll see, like, oh, this is an area that I've grown in, or this is an area that maybe has gone down or up, to each of these questions here. So then after they have some time in their advisory class and the teacher's explaining the report to them, it's based out of 5 points, and the students are able to ask questions about just the report if they need to. Then the next thing they're going to do is really focus in on their strengths. We like to just focus on the positives. What do they see that they can celebrate? What was their highest goal? What are areas that they're doing really well in personally? And then once they have an opportunity to go through those questions with the advisor individually to think about it, then they make some goals. So, if I've scored low in challenging feelings, they have to really think about where they were at the time that they answered those questions, and, what are ways that I can grow in that area. And the great thing is that they're doing this individually, but they're having discussions amongst the group as well, because, maybe someone has some ideas for, this is what's helped me in grit. And so that's the hope, especially when they reflect on the community, is that they can think about, okay, this person helped, this is what they did to help themselves. Maybe I can do something similar, or maybe they can gain ideas for areas where they can grow in some of those areas and to continue to grow in some of their strengths. And then also looking at the areas where they're weak in and say, okay, what are some ways that I can grow in areas where I'm not as strong, and so again, they have the advisor there to reflect and to guide students through this process as they reflect and they create goals. And most of the advisory teachers are able to, whether it be individually or in small groups, but on our Mondays is when they meet with them individually, they can again reflect with students, hey, how are your goals going? Because they not only talk to them about academic goals, but these also the SEL goals and personal, social, emotional as well. How can you grow? What goals did you set for yourself? How will you know that you've attained your goal as well? And then the last part, as we look at the data and the information, is that we talk about this as a faculty. So in our upcoming PAC Day, it's a great opportunity that we get to really discuss what we've learned from students, and we get to share with one another just the information and the data that we've learned here, and how can we really enhance the student experience in advisory and throughout their time here at school as well. So during the PAC Day, we'll have the advisors in all grade levels get together, and they'll just discuss what they've heard from students, from the posters and answering the questions, and what did they learn about their own students in their advisory class, about their perspective at school and the things that they're feeling. And then after that, we'll break out and we'll see, okay, how can we change the advisory program? How can we inform, what things or lessons do we need to add? What experience are the students saying that, this is where I really need help in, or this is where I would like to grow in, that we can really inform the advisory program to make changes to really help students and listen to the things that they're saying, to enhance and to grow their time here in the middle school.
Great, thanks, Alex and Jolene. Yeah, a lot of great information there about our students. This is obviously all self-reported data, so coming directly from kids. I think it's really important that kids, as Alex said, have a voice and that they know that we're listening. Sometimes I think if kids do surveys and they don't see any action or result, it doesn't feel important to them. However, coming back to talk about it with their peers helps them to understand that their voices are valued and their voices are heard. Middle school is also a really important time for students to engage metacognitively, that, thinking about their thinking and learning about their learning piece. We know sometimes students in middle school think that they're the only ones who sometimes struggle with emotional regulation, but it's useful for them to see, oh, others feel the same way as I do. So looking at that community data is as important for some students as it is to look at their own and to reflect on how they're feeling personally. So what questions might you have? We've got a quiet group today. Pop something in the chat or on the Q&A. What questions do you have after hearing this information about our student wellbeing and our report information, our data? I think we're all very pleased to see the trends, the trend lines moving upward. Grit, as Jolene mentioned earlier, is something we've been working on as a school. Our students are in some ways relatively privileged in the opportunities that they have, but they are, every child, every person strikes things that are difficult that they need to persevere through. So helping kids with that is an important one. And not always our strongest result, but all of our results are trending in the right way, which is great. Any questions at all from our audience? Well, Alex and Jolene, you must have done a wonderful job, answered everybody's questions. I know folks will have the opportunity to hear the video and to see the slides. Perhaps people will enjoy going back and looking at it more slowly as well. Oh, good. We've got one question. Let's have a look at that. Will the data be shared? Yes. So the data will be shared in this slide set so that you can see close up what Jolene has passed on in terms of the increases and the areas that we're still working on, particularly grit and safety. Yes, and you can then see the comparison between fall and spring on those charts. Perhaps, Alex, if you could go back to one of those early slides that shows the overview of the data, and we can have that in front of us. So this is a student page, but where is that overview? I think it's just coming up. You'll also see, there we go, great. So you can see how much we've either increased or decreased since the fall of 2022, and you can also see how we compare nationally to others. For example, supportive relationships were in the 80th or 90th percentile. That means that our middle school students feel more favorable than 80 to 99% of others who took this survey. So you can see while we've increased with grit, we're still only in the 20th to the 39th percentile, and that's one of the things that keeps us working on grit despite our positive trend. So this data will be in the slides that you can see in the Mustang Bulletin. Your children have also all received or will receive in the coming week their personal reports. So great dinner time conversation. Ask your child to see their report and sit down and have a chat about it with them, knowing the sorts of questions that their advisors also been asking them. And feel free to reach out to your child's counsellor if your child is not so keen to share their report or can't put their fingers on it to show you, and then we can help facilitate a conversation as well.
And students are receiving their report next week, grades 6 and 8, and then they'll go through the slide deck that I showed you, where they'll reflect on their own personal. This week, they've already done the community one. But for grade 7, because of the grade 7 trip, they're just a little bit behind. So they'll get their personal one in 2 weeks is when they'll reflect on that.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Wonderful. If there are any more questions, we'll hang on the call for a few more minutes. Otherwise, we thank you for coming, and we hope you enjoy having a look at the slides in a bit more detail in the Mustang Bulletin this week. Enjoy this lovely spring weather. Hope to see some of you at the May PTA social. Thanks for joining us today.